Hello again, and welcome to Aviation News Talk, where we talk what else? General aviation, with relevant news and flying tips, and today with great stories, just interesting stories for pilots and student pilots to help keep you safe. I'm Max Truscott. Occasionally, I try to lighten things up and hopefully give you a laugh or two, and to that end, I took the dozen or so really weird aviation stories from the past few weeks, and I invited Rob Mark to read through them with me and to add some commentary. And of course, some of these stories, they involve stupid criminals. So as we tell you the stories, you be the judge and think about what you feel is an appropriate punishment. And then we'll tell you the fines or prison sentences that were handed down. Last week in episode 185, we talked about the Martha Lunken flying under a bridge incident. And we talked with Dr. Scott Denstead about his new EasyWX Brief app. So if you didn't hear that episode, you may want to check it out. And if you enjoy the great stories we're telling today, and you have a friend who you think would also like them, or maybe who has done some of the things we talk about, please click on the share button in whatever app you're listening to us on and send this episode to a friend. And then follow up and encourage him or her to either follow or subscribe, depending upon the app that they're using, to the Aviation News Talk podcast. Now let's get to the stories. Here's our conversation with Rob Mark. And to help us here today is Rob Mark. He's the senior editor at Flying Magazine, who also publishes the Jetwine blog at jetwine.com. Now, he's worked in the past as an air traffic controller, an airline pilot, a corporate pilot, and a CFI. A lot of great experience. Rob, thank you for joining us here again today.
Hey, thank you for inviting me once again, Max. And as usual, you have some interesting topics to discuss.
Well, we have talked about news of the weird in the past, and it's always kind of fun. And the way it happens is that sometimes when I look at the news for the week, I say, wow, the majority of these stories are just strange. So we dig up a few more, and then we pull in our expert. And Rob, do you remember this sound? Aviation.
Stories of the
You recorded that. I remember that now.
That's right.
That will haunt me for the rest of my days, I'm sure.
I don't think so. Hey, let's dive right into it. I've got two stories coming up here, and this is under the theme of what's up with Southwest pilots. Now, we, of course, love Southwest. Rob has talked about them for years on the Airplane Geeks podcast. We both fly the airline. We love them. But coincidentally, two of their pilots are just suffering perhaps the effects of the pandemic. That's all I can chalk it up to. But this gentleman went on a rant immediately after he landed in the Bay Area. And we wouldn't know about this, except unfortunately, he was pushing the push to talk button. This went out over 124.0, the tower frequency, and was recorded. And so the story, which comes from sfgate.com, says that on March 24th, in a hot mic incident recorded at the San Jose airport, an unidentified pilot was heard delivering an expletive-heavy rant. On the March 12th recording, the pilot said, "F this place, GD liberal Fs." He then continues, making several other curse word-laden comments before being interrupted by what seems to be an air traffic controller. Continued on and said, effing weirdos, probably driving around in effing Hyundais, effing roads. It just goes on and on and on. I would have played the clip, but it would be all beeps. That's really how bad it is. Anyway, Live ATC has confirmed the authenticity of the recording, but not which pilot or airline might have been involved. Commenting on the incident, and we'll give you the follow-up here in a moment, the airport spokesperson said, "This communication is very unprofessional, and I have forwarded the communications to the FAA." In a statement, FAA spokesperson Ian Greger, who's their West Coast PR person, says FAA regulations prohibit airline pilots from talking about subjects that are unrelated to safety, conducting their flights while taxiing and while flying below 10,000 feet. Now, the update says that the pilot who delivered the rant has been confirmed to be an employee of Southwest. And addressing that, Southwest said, "Our corporate culture is built upon a tenet of treating others with concern and dignity, and the comments are inconsistent with the professional behavior and overall respect that we require from our employees." And it also says, as a policy, the FAA does not identify the subjects of an investigation, but a private pilot based out of SJC said that after listening to it, my opinion is that the voice talking during the stuck mic matches the voice at the end saying, "Southwest 531, ready to go." Oops. He commented that it just makes me sad and angry to hear folks who are expected to be professionals in care of the general public acting in this manner. Well, Rob, what do you think about this behavior?
Well, you started with a good one, Max. We all often tell students that if you're ever flying alone and it's real quiet up there, you might want to check your mic and make sure the button or the microphone button is not pressed for some reason, or that the most of the radios these days will light up or give you a little T or something on the screen to show that you're transmitting. But I think when people are in a mood like this, they probably don't even think about it or even care. Of course, this is ridiculous kinds of conversations for, to go out over the air. I mean, imagine we don't even know who it was that was the recipient of this chat. I mean, obviously the other pilot. If I'd been in the right seat listening to a captain like this, I would have probably just turned my head and looked out the window and gone, because when people get started like this, there's just no stopping them. But it is unprofessional at a minimum, but it does absolutely destroy the sterile cockpit rule, which is, hey, folks, don't talk about anything except work until you're at the gate and the chocks are in, because you're going to miss something. You're going to miss a turn on a taxiway or a hold short or God knows what. But there are some people that just have to learn the hard way. Luckily, it wasn't an incident, but my guess is this particular pilot got a little retraining and perhaps a bit of time off.
I would imagine so, and justifiably so. It's interesting. Just yesterday, I was out taxiing at Half Moon Bay with a client who's working on his instrument rating, but we were actually practicing landings in a new aircraft he's transitioning to. And twice he missed the turnoff to the beginning of the runway. And I use that as a point. It's kind of funny because I talked to him about it the first time. The second time, we pulled over in the run-up area. We must have spent 10 minutes just kind of discussing a number of things in the flight. And, my comment was, when you're taxiing, you need to focus on the taxiing. You can't be doing all these other things. But I let him go right by it quite a ways the second time because I wanted to sink in. If I had just simply said, hey, you're about to miss this taxiway, it wouldn't have sunk in. But when he finally realized it, he said, oh, did we miss it? And I said, yeah, a long time ago. It kind of sunk in.
Well, that's good. And these days, most of these airplanes are glass, and there's so much electronics in there. And then people often have an iPad on the seat next to them or strapped to their knee or who knows what. And they're always trying to taxi and punch in a few digits or codes while they're doing it. I go, oh, God, please stop that. I mean, you're going to hurt somebody, most likely me. But people just, it's just like distracted drivers. Some of them just don't get it any better than people do when they're in an SUV.
Yeah, I tell pilots all the time, if you have to do something while you're taxiing, stop the airplane and do it. Don't be trying to do other things while you're taxiing. I think people totally underrate the level of attention required for taxiing, and it just gets them in trouble. Well, so he clearly violated the sterile cockpit rule, and I went to look up and kind of find out, what does the FAA's 2150.3c tell us? That's the FAA Compliance and Enforcement Program document. And this qualifies as a severity level 1, which is the lowest of the different things that they show violations for. Now they then divided into low, moderate, and high. And if it were just careless, that would be low. But if it's reckless or intentional, this was clearly intentional, that it moves up to the moderate penalty. So what would you guess a moderate penalty might be for this violation?
30-day suspension.
Yeah, so let's see. So for an individual acting as an airman, they say that the fine could be anywhere from $400 to $700 with a maximum of $1,100 to $1,400. And it says nothing about suspension, which kind of surprises me. So yeah, I mean, if you feel like you want to go on a rant and you've got that much money available to spend, now you know what it's going to cost you.
The one thing we're going to see in all of these stories today, which I hate to give it away, but these stories are about some really stupid pilots, but that they don't seem to have any idea that there are going to be consequences for their operations, for their actions, I should say. I just find that amazing. But maybe we should go on to the next one because, oh, wait, I think that's the one I'm supposed to read.
You bet. Another Southwest pilot. Just coincidence. This could have been anyone.
I know.
Certainly not you or I, but could have been any pilot.
It's sad because, again, Southwest is one of my favorite airlines. It says that on April 2nd, a Southwest air pilot did something very naughty. He exposed himself during a flight from Philly to Orlando, and I won't give the flight number's name, but he was the PIC, and the prosecutors in the action specified that the acts began, continued, and were completed while the aircraft was in flight. So what they don't tell you is how everything occurred. It explains that the exposure of this pilot.
We're probably talking about his pants being unzipped is kind of my guess.
And we're assuming, of course, that this was a man, because usually men are the only ones that do stuff as stupid as this. But okay, that the incident occurred at the front of the plane or in the cockpit. The pilots were the only people on board aware of the incident. So that means the other pilot turned him in, which thank God they did. And the flight attendants or passengers didn't get involved. And the spokesman for Southwest Airlines told NBC that the pilot violated the corporation's policy about how to act in the workplace. Oh, really? You think? Oh, God. All right. The event was recently brought to our attention, and we've cooperated with the appropriate outside agencies as they investigate. Southwest Airlines takes all matters related to workplace conduct very seriously, with a well-defined policy and reporting process for harassment, sexual harassment, discrimination, and retaliation claims. Our corporate culture is built upon treating others with mutual respect and dignity, and the events alleged in this situation are inconsistent with that behavior. Okay, I let's cut to the chase here. This person is no longer employed by Southwest Airlines. They left last year. And when the news media tried to reach out to the airline, Brandy King, who is one of their PR people down there, didn't answer the question about whether the pilot had been fired or had left on their own. But only that they had moved to another commercial airline. Okay. So I guess you're wondering, Max, what happened to this man? See, there I go, being sexist again, assuming it was a man, although I know I'm sure it was.
I think we can be 100% sure on this one.
I don't think any ladies that are listening are going to say, oh, no, I think that was probably a lady. So what do you think is the result of something like this? What could this person be charged with? Or I'm not charged with, but what would the fine be, do you think?
Yeah, so we have to look at this really on multiple levels. Is this a chargeable offense under the FAA? Certainly, he's lost his employment, and then there's the criminal aspect of it as well. And apparently, there was a misdemeanor charge, which was Section 22-1312 under the Washington D.C. Code, and it basically says it's unlawful for a person in public to make obscene or indecent exposure of themselves. And the charge carries a maximum punishment of 90 days behind bars if convicted. They say the pilot could also be charged with a $500 fine if found guilty. So that's probably one of the big challenges they face is defending themselves in court. I'm hard-pressed to figure out what FAR might be a question here, though. I'll tell you one, which probably most people wouldn't think of. When you get your ATP, one of the requirements is that you remember it. Go ahead. What do you remember?
Well, there's something about, I can't get the words exactly, but that you will maintain a professional demeanor at all times when you're operating under the airline transport pilot certificate. And
Yeah,
I think that's the only one that has that sort of semi-moral judgment attached to it.
I can't remember the exact words either, but I do recall that it says something about the moral qualities of the applicant to become an ATP, and I think that would be, frankly, the basis of a revocation of their ATP certificate. And I frankly wouldn't have a problem with that. I think this kind of behavior is so egregious that that would be called for.
Yeah, and of course, as we mentioned before we started, we don't all also we also don't know really if the pilot had some physical issue that was going on that just caused him to lose it.
Well, I think it's probably more of a mental issue.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And but again, we're not doctors.
Okay. So again, this may be more of a mental health issue than a moral issue, but if you're wondering about that ATP requirement, I looked it up. Under 61.153, to be eligible for an ATP certificate, a person must, item C, be of good moral character. And while I doubt that an examiner has ever stopped an ATP check ride and said, "I'm sorry you failed because you lack moral character," the FAA, however, has on a number of occasions cited this particular requirement when they have revoked an ATP certificate. And there's one other certificate issued by the FAA that has a requirement for good moral character, and you can read about that in Part 65, which includes the requirements for an ATC or Air Traffic Control Operator certificate. Now, interestingly, the long-gone Part 143 used to require good moral character for ground instructors, but when Part 61 was rewritten in 1997 to include ground instructor requirements, the moral character requirement was dropped. Well, let's see. We have some pilots who have been sentenced, so we actually know what the outcomes were. We've got several of these, so let me tell you about the first one. This comes from the justice.gov website, U.S. Justice Department. It says, convicted felon sentenced for flying airplane without a pilot's license. And this just came out a week or so ago. It says a 5-time previously convicted felon was sentenced today in prison for flying an airplane without a license. According to documents, in September 2018, a gentleman who's 31 years old, lives in Fredericksburg, Maryland, took an airplane at Shannon Airport in Fredericksburg for a joyride. He has a business, by the way. Now, get this, the name of his business is Outlaw Aviation. You just got to wonder about that. Anyway, it says he was employed by the airplane's owner to assemble the plane, but had not yet completed the job at the time of the flight. The airplane had a caster rear wheel, a plastic bicycle water bottle for radiator overflow, and duct tape on key parts of the airplane. So it was pretty poor condition. Despite poor weather conditions, he flew just above Shannon's airport's fuel tanks and twice crossed the airspace used by aircraft on approach to the airport's main runway. He flew around the airport for 10 to 15 minutes at a dangerous altitude of around 500 feet. He did not possess a pilot's license at the time of the flight. According to the court documents, he has a lengthy criminal history with 5 prior felony convictions, including a previous conviction involving unlawful activity pertaining to aircraft. In this case, the defendant was found guilty for destruction of property, unauthorized use of a vehicle in connection with a separate September 2018 incident that occurred at Stafford Regional. And I said Maryland, this might have been down in Virginia. So I guess the question is, you be the judge, Rob. Is this person going to serve time?
Well, we can't exactly convict him of flying an airplane without a license when he technically apparently didn't want to be a pilot. We can't pull his license. So the question is, did he endanger people? I would imagine that it's something similar to someone endangering people with an automobile. And I don't know exactly. I mean, I'm not a criminal attorney. I'm sure there's some consequence, just as there would be if you were driving a car. I don't happen to know what it is. Again, even if the guy pleads guilty, I'm not sure what they would do to him.
Well, I can tell you he got jail time. How much do you think?
30 days.
14 months.
Wow.
Yep.
All right.
I'm serious.
Well, didn't you ask yourself, too, though, what the Sam Hill kind of airplane was this that this guy was supposedly flying a plastic bicycle water bottle for a radiator overflow. It sounds like a light sport or something. Maybe something operating with a Rotax that has an overflow tank, but duct tape on key parts of the airplane. Okay.
No idea, but definitely one of those stories of the weird. Well, we've got one for you coming up.
I like this one. This is called I Didn't Do It. Well, I would have done it if I could have gotten away with it, but since I didn't get away with it, I didn't do it. This is from Brussels in Belgium. A pilot booked a helicopter flight over Brussels last September, apparently to take some photos. And he brought a couple of friends with. And when the helicopter reached overhead the Justice Palace in Brussels, the three produced air pistols and threatened the pilot. No, not squirt guns, but air pistols. Okay. She was ordered to fly in the direction of a local prison for women and apparently was told to put down in the prison yard so that the person who had rented the helicopter could pick up his wife, who was awaiting trial on charges of murder. When the rentor saw the pilot was attempting to contact air traffic control, he pushed on the steering column, causing the helicopter to go into a nosedive and forcing the pilot to fight for control. Of course, I thought they were already down, but maybe I guess not. Only the, I got to love the way some of this is written too. Only the cold-blooded reactions of the pilot were able to avoid a catastrophe, the court said in a final judgment. I don't know if she bit him or what happened, but once the aircraft was back under the control, the pilot made as if they were trying to land without success, and the three hijackers decided to just give up and ordered her to fly to another town about 50 kilometers from Brussels. Now, the person that had rented the helicopter was arrested the following day, as were his two accomplices who explained that they wanted to help liberate his wife and who he had not been able to see because of COVID-19 restrictions. And he said the two accomplices said, hey, we weren't in this for free. He was going to give us somewhere between 25 and 50,000 euro for the work. Of course, now the two accomplices later denied any knowledge of the prison plot, claiming that it was just a flight to shoot pictures. The court didn't buy that. Under Belgian law, it is not a criminal offense to escape or try to escape from a prison, although the acts you may commit while doing so, such as assaulting an officer, may be prosecuted. The trio of hijackers, on the other hand, were charged with organizing a prison break, illegal detention of the pilot, theft, and conspiracy, and they got some penalties from that. The fellow that rented the helicopter, they don't actually tell us how much time he got in prison. Probably at least a year. His accomplices were, I'm sure he must have gotten more now that I'm looking at this. His accomplices each got 30-month sentences and were ordered to pay 7,500 euro in compensation to the pilot and another 4,000 euro to the helicopter company. Meanwhile, the court case against the intended escapee, the lady they were trying to get out of the prison, is going to be retried after the jury at the original trial was given a document they ought not to have seen. What that has to do with the story is absolutely beyond me. So maybe she was trying to text or sext that Southwest pilot in the cockpit. I don't know.
It hadn't occurred to me that these stories might be connected. All right, you be the judge, Rob. I crossed out the prison time. If you were sentencing this person, how much time would they get?
So if the two accomplices got 2.5 years for for an attempted prison break, I would imagine the renter must have gotten. Did they give him 10 years?
I was thinking you might go high. He only got 5 years, which was really stunning to me. If this were charged in the United States, I think that would have been charged as, probably kidnapping or hijacking or something like that. I would have thought that it would be, 10 years or more. I'm just kind of surprised that they got off with just 5 years. Didn't make a whole lot of sense to me.
Wow. Yeah. Well, of course, part of the problem is that they didn't do it. I mean, they said they were really there just taking pictures, and it's the three of them against the pilot, and there's only one of her. So doesn't the majority win? And but I guess that didn't work.
The other thing I was thinking is this very easily could have turned into a fatal accident. They were talking about one of these people pushing on the controls, and the pilot having to fight for control. As you know, controls in a helicopter are very delicate, and it requires both hands and constant use of both hands to keep the aircraft stable. So I think this is an incredibly serious offense, which is why, to me, 5 years is just not in proportion to I think the severity of this crime. But maybe that's the difference between sentences in Belgium versus in the United States.
Yeah.
Well, here's somebody in the United States, and he was charged with crashing his drone into an LAPD helicopter. Story we talked about on this show quite a while ago, but he has now been sentenced. He was charged with unsafe operation of an unmanned aircraft, which is the first time that charge has been used in the country. It says a Hollywood man who flew a drone that crashed into an LAPD helicopter last year was sentenced. They give his name here. He pleaded guilty in January to a misdemeanor charge of unsafe operation of an unmanned aircraft. And they described that on the morning of September 18th, LAPD officers responded to a burglary call at a Hollywood pharmacy, asked for air support. As the helicopter was on its way, the pilot saw the man's drone in midair and tried to evade it, but struck the helicopter and had to do an emergency landing. The drone damaged the helicopter's nose, antenna, and bottom cowlings, according to court papers. Prosecutors said, quote, if the drone had struck the helicopter's main rotor instead of the fuselage, it could have brought the helicopter down. The officers identified the owner of the drone after looking at the camera's SD card on the drone. The FBI later served a search warrant at his home, where he admitted to flying the drone after hearing police cars because he, quote, wanted to see what was going on. His arrest occurred in November during National Drone Safety Awareness Week. You can only just, you can't make this stuff up. It's bizarre, which is sponsored by the FAA and seeks to promote drone safety. And the FAA says it's critical for all drone operators to understand that as soon as they start flying outside, they are pilots with a responsibility to operate safely, just like pilots of manned aircraft. While our preference is to educate, we don't hesitate to take strong enforcement when warranted. Okay, Rob, what was the sentence? What's appropriate for someone who smashes into a helicopter with a drone?
Well, considering the fact that when you buy a drone, at least recently, I haven't seen any paperwork on it that says, hey, by the way, before you fly this thing above the ground, you need to realize that you're part of the National Airspace System, and that you need to at least take the Part 107 training and become familiar with the hazards outside of your own head, that is. And people don't get this either. I mean, they've just been so popular that people just keep buying them and they don't think about it. Anyway, so national drone running into an LAPD copter, a year.
And I just want to mention how serious this is. I know a gentleman who's a listener to this show who hit a drone while flying in the vicinity of Camarillo. And the FAA apparently didn't take a whole lot of interest in the situation. His mechanic was aware of multiple incidents of aircraft at that airport being struck by drones. So this is a really serious problem, and clearly it could have brought this helicopter down. So what's stunning is that he was given a $500 fine and probation. Does that make any sense to you at all?
No, none at all. And I guess it's probably a good thing I'm not foreman of a jury this week, because I'm kind of striking out on most of the bases.
Well, and I think to me, the sentencing is just varies so wildly across these stories, which is part of what makes it interesting. So there's a lot of crazy stuff going on in Albania these days, apparently some unrest, but it's also affecting ATC. So tell folks about that.
Well, in Albania, I bet most people couldn't even pick out Albania on a world map if they had to. So they're thinking, why do I care about this? Well, it's important because the Albanian airspace is an organization that caters to quite a bit of international traffic overflying the country. And the controllers in Albania, well, they were a little unhappy recently because kind of like, here in the States, we're pretty lucky. We don't pay a user fee every time we take off or land or file an IFR flight plan or anything like that. We just get up and go, which is why we are the envy of the world. But most other countries, you pay for every single operation. And the Albanian government, that is the air navigation service provider over there, has fallen upon hard times because with COVID, air traffic is down and their revenues were down considerably, about 80% at last estimate. And so what they did is they told their controllers, hey guys, we ain't got no money. You're going to get a pay cut, And the controller said, I don't think so. Now, whether they had a contract or not, I kind of doubt it. If it's Albania, I might be wrong. And please, International Federation of Air Traffic Controllers, feel free to yell at me if I got that one wrong. But the controllers, many of them, 28 of them, as a matter of fact, kind of went on sick days. Were too sick to work, and then they tried protesting. And 3 of them were arrested, and the rest were released shortly after. But this goes back to what you saw about, the penalties for obstructions within the aviation industry outside of the United States. They don't just slap you on the hand. There have been quite a few instances over the years where pilots, crew members, mechanics, air traffic controllers have kind of colored outside the lines, strayed beyond the lines, and have gone to jail. They do not fool around with this kind of stuff over there. So I imagine it has improved because this story is about 10 days old, actually 2 weeks old. So, but I don't know that for certain.
Yeah, and so the Albanian court approved the arrest and basically approved the prosecution's request to not release the 3 air traffic controllers who faced charges of abuse of office. And so the pay cut, by the way, was 50%. I can imagine why they were upset. I can imagine why they went on strike. According to this, it doesn't really tell us if there were other aggravating circumstances that caused them to be arrested. But it made me wonder, Rob, you used to be an air traffic controller. Are you aware of air traffic controllers ever being arrested?
Yes, actually. If you go back in the United States, back to 1981, when the PATCO guys struck, there were a few of them that were taken away in chains and leg cuffs and that sort of thing. But that is almost never an issue with air traffic controllers here in the U.S.
Well, let me tell you about a famous one real briefly out here on the West Coast at San Francisco International. We had a tower supervisor who was arrested, and when he was sentenced in 2002, I believe it was, he got 51 months in prison because on his lunch break he liked to rob banks to help make ends meet. He was, had a long story about how he needed the money, and he would go out and I think he'd robbed a total of $40,000. So he had to make restitution and 51 months in the big house. So folks, crime does not pay. If you're short of money, don't go robbing banks.
Well, I always figured that if I was going to get caught for some unscrupulous crime, I'm sure as hell not going to jail for 40 grand. I mean, exactly. I'm going to do it. If I'm going to jail, I want my friends to at least say, well, you got to give him credit. He managed to get $787 million into his bank account before they caught him. But I mean, something that people would appreciate, not 40 grand. Those are people that are thinking small, and that's why they got caught. Well, and what they did is illegal too. But other than that.
And kids who are listening at home now, do not listen to Rob.
Right. Do not do as I do or as I say, actually.
Do as you do, not as you joke.
Yes.
Well, so we said before, it might not be just the FAA that comes after you. We've got 3 more stories coming up on this. This is about a NYPD cop who was put on trial because he was accused while on the job of flying a surveillance aircraft in the shape of, what shall we call it, male anatomy. Let's leave it at that. Anyway, he was previously lauded for his past rescues and things that he had done, but he was accused of misusing the federally funded Cessna plane, as well as making improper entries into a flight log and conducting flight surveys previously. But this time he was up in front of the department on charges for misuse of the aircraft. And it said, I love the comment by his lawyer, who argued that the case was unbelievably complicated. And I'm thinking, really? I mean, you just have to look at the FlightAware track and go, yep, doesn't look too complicated to me. Anyway, he said, unless you're actually an actual pilot, which is a little redundant, this is an unbelievably complicated case in terms of the details that my client is accused of. My client at no point intentionally misled the NYPD. So apparently that part is true, that he did come clean and was very upfront about what he did. And so I guess his belief was that if you admit to what you did, you should be off the hook. They say NYPD purchased the $4 million plane in 2017 for secret operations to check container ships off New York City's coast for hazardous substances or radiation that could be used in a terrorist attack. The special operations supervisor testified that cops assigned to the confidential program within the aviation unit were given false IDs and required to dress in civilian clothing when operating the aircraft. The officer was part of that program. He declined to speak. A second cop who was on the witness list, who lost 5 vacation days for his role in this particular act, abruptly decided not to testify. And I'll go ahead and tell you the penalty, Rob. It wasn't very severe. This gentleman lost 5 days of vacation time for his little drawing that he made in the sky.
Well, I don't think I will say anything about this one because there's no way I could do it and not get myself in trouble being the smart aleck, and so I won't do that. But they don't explain how large a pattern he flew, do they?
I don't know, but this would be a great time to move on to the next story, which occurred over Youngstown State University in Ohio. So tell us about that.
Okay, this comes from Catherine's report, and it's amazing to me that they seem to make such an interesting story out of it, though. Apparently, this pilot rented an airplane from a friend, and the airplane was flown low over the Stambaugh Stadium in Youngstown, Ohio, during a football game on a Saturday night. And the FAA said they're investigating it because the airplane was very, very close to the press box, to the crowds. And on top of it, the pilot, it would be very hard for the pilot to deny it because the news camera, the local news TV station, captured it all on video. And they said it was pretty close. And the pilot was back in Youngstown Municipal Court a few days later, and he was charged with inciting panic and disorderly conduct at that game in Ohio after flying a single-engine Cessna close to the press box and the stadium lights to the attention of all the fans. The pilot apparently had a commercial and a multi-engine certificate. The attorney argued the case should be thrown out because the elevation that the pilot flew at during the game wasn't in the jurisdiction of those that arrested him. meaning the cops don't control that airspace. The prosecuting attorney, although he apparently laughed, no, I don't know that he did, but said the pilot flew below 1,000 feet above the ground, and as far as the FAA goes, that's close enough over a congested area. And surprisingly, the judge, would have just ruled here. The judge is going to rule next week on whether the case moves forward or should be dismissed, which I've always thought is interesting because a civil court judge doesn't know anything about any of this kind of thing. And I'm afraid they will err on the side of, I don't know, nobody got hurt, some silly thing like that. And then the pilot might get off. But now, of course, I think FAA could still very easily come after this person for civil penalty, like we've seen with a number of people flying airplanes close to the ground or trees or bridges or whatever lately. But again, so we'll have to see what happened when the judge rules.
And that hasn't happened yet at this point. But a key reason for sharing this story is just to let people know that if you do something just totally foolish like this, it may not just be FAA penalties that you're looking at. You might think, they'll just take my license away. No, you might actually end up in jail. I looked up the statute, and there's an interesting factor. This inducing panic charge. It's a felony of the second degree, and apparently it's elevated if it occurs at a public place that involves a school or institution of higher learning. Well, unfortunately for this pilot, he was over a university football stadium. Probably had no idea that suddenly made this a much more severe charge than if he had circled somebody's house. But a felony of the second degree in Ohio, the guidelines are for a prison term of 2 to 8 years, maximum fine of $1,500. The misdemeanor charge is up to 30 days in jail and a fine of $250. All of these charges might get dismissed, but still, I think people should be on notice that there are some courts in some jurisdictions that will bring criminal charges against pilots who do this kind of crazy stuff. So keep that in mind anytime you just think, wouldn't it be fun to, XYZ? No, you might end up regretting that for the rest of your life.
And I think the watch phrase is that if the other pilot or someone in your aircraft says, "Hey, watch this," or "How about if we try?" Those are bell ringing words that you go, no. We don't want to do that. We don't want to do that. Flying an airplane, as it says on the certificate, is a privilege. It is not a right.
Yep, indeed. And I worry sometimes that alcohol may be involved in these kinds of things, or people may be daring each other. And sometimes you read about when there are two pilots in the cockpit that somehow the decision-making criteria drops to the lowest common denominator. It's like, no. As long as one person says no, you should have agreement that it's not going to happen. You don't need just one person to say yes to do something crazy like this. So anyway, this pilot was solo, but still, for people traveling with other pilots, don't give up your judgment to another pilot, even if that pilot has more years of experience, more certificates. If they're doing, talking about doing something that is wrong or risky or just plain stupid, then be forceful and insist that they back down and not do it. So we have more of these. Who would have thought? All these buzzing is, I guess spring comes along and everybody wants to go buzzing. This comes out of danspapers.com about a pilot who buzzed Sag Harbor, which I believe is on Long Island. He wrote, "Sorry it was dumb," in a text message after he had flown his airplane at altitudes as low as 100 feet and sometimes faster than 150 miles an hour over Sag Harbor's waterfront and the East Hampton community of Springs on April the 13th. By the way, I saw a video from this. This guy was low. There were pictures of him over, businesses, buildings in the downtown area, and that airplane was not very high at all. And the pilot of East Hampton will face a criminal charge or charges as a result of the flight, according to Sag Harbor Village Police Chief. And they said that they were still gathering witness statements and video evidence to determine the appropriate charge. The chief previously indicated in a phone interview he was considering reckless endangerment as a possibility. If charged in the first degree, that's a felony, which carries a possible prison term. The FAA is also investigating. And of course, it says that they could suspend or revoke the pilot's license. And I don't know that it's in this story. I looked up the pilot's license. Oh, yeah, it is in this story. He got it in December of 2020. And in his exuberance, less than 4 months later, is off, breaking the FARs. Anyway, it says that 9/11 calls lit up in nearby towns. Some people came outside the buildings to see what was happening. As a plane roared overhead, a 4-seat single-engine Cessna 182 owned by the gentleman, who was also owner of a auto collision body repair shop. Yeah, you just kind of wonder, why somebody gets their pilot's license and then decides they have to do something so crazy. Anyway, it was a 45-minute long flight where he was flying figure eights over the downtown area. The flight then arced over the water, circled low just offshore near Jessup's Neck, and then headed east toward 3 Mile Harbor. And let's see, anything else here? Because his altimeter setting was incorrect, he wrote, he thought that he was flying at a higher altitude, an error he said he discovered upon returning to the airport to land. Rob, can you spell the words "the dog ate my homework"?
Yes, I believe I've heard that one lately about, well, I may have erred in the, but of course it wasn't really my fault because the piece of equipment failed, and I'm too stupid to realize that, you know what? I can see a bird sitting on the roof of this building from this altitude. Maybe I'm a little low. Oh, no, it couldn't be that because I'm a relatively new pilot. What would I know? I mean, I'm sorry. They ought to yank this guy's license and make him go through the whole process all over again.
At a bare minimum. Yeah, according to FlightAware.com, actually it was FlightRadar24.com, the plane's altitude was as low as 80 feet. And you know what? Any pilot, any student pilot, any non-pilot can tell the difference between 80 feet and 1,000 feet. I mean, that's just an absurd statement on the face of it. So we don't know what the outcome of this would be, but, this gentleman is not only facing FAA sanctions, but possibly criminal liability as well, all because he somehow thought, hey, wouldn't it be fun to go buzz the town at low altitude?
Well, and I think something that is extenuating here that we didn't mention is that when the police officer managed, very astute police officer here, found out who the airplane belonged to. She tracked the pilot down, called him on his cell phone, and he said he couldn't talk to her right now or at the moment because he was still landing the airplane. Yeah, but he did pick up the phone to tell her that he couldn't talk to her because he was landing the airplane. And on another call, he said, hey, I was just having some fun and everybody just needs to calm down. If you wanted to say anything to me to incite me even more as a student pilot or a new pilot, those would probably be the ones that would do it. You couldn't even make this stuff up.
Yeah, it's just stunning to me that he would pick up the phone as he's landing the airplane. I mean, again, total lack of judgment.
Well, and they often say you can't teach pilots judgment. I don't know that I agree with that. I think that you can give them good examples of good judgment and bad judgment and hope that they can tell the difference. It's like saying that you can't teach your kids right from wrong. I don't believe that. But again, I think some people are more receptive to the message than others. And this apparently is somebody who could give a damn.
Well, it's certainly someone who, in my opinion, doesn't deserve to have a pilot's license. So,
no, I agree.
This next story is kind of interesting because some pilots got in trouble. Not at all clear that they actually knew what it was that was going on that got them into trouble.
Now, this was a charter flight, apparently, out of Lebanon. This happened just a year ago. The CEO or the former CEO of Nissan Motors was in trouble in Japan and for apparently it looks like embezzling money or something to that effect. And the Japanese had him in jail. And the court gave him almost 4.5 years in jail. And the lawyer said, well, he'll never serve that much. But all we know is that after the CEO was arrested, somehow he disappeared from Japan in a private aircraft from a Turkish charter company, and was flown to Lebanon. And he was, actually, I don't know if he was rearrested over there. I think the trail of the CEO goes a bit cold here. But the important part is what happened to the pilots. Because again, remember, we were talking earlier about the fact that outside of the United States, government agencies do not treat pilots very kindly. Let's go back to the some years ago, 10 years ago, when that Embraer legacy airplane clipped the wing of a 737 down in Brazil, and the 737 crashed, and the legacy landed safely, although it was badly damaged. The Brazilian government kept those two pilots, the two American pilots, in jail for, I can't remember how long, but it was quite a while. But in this case, the two pilots were charged by the Turkish authorities and were put in prison, and basically because they were considered some of the masterminds behind the effort to free this Nissan CEO from Japan. And I think, if I read it correctly, all they thought they were doing was flying a charter to pick up a man in Japan and take him back to Lebanon. And so it seems as if nobody was more surprised than the two pilots that the passengers that the company had paid for or the passenger was a fleeing convict. And but again, the Turkish government did not see very kindly on this, and they put them in jail for a number of months. And then it says they were not expected to return to jail due to the time that they'd already served. But the other good thing for the CEO is that Japan doesn't have an extradition treaty with Lebanon, so the CEO indeed is probably still free and running around over there.
Yeah, the CEO, as I recall, was under house arrest for financial, maneuvering with the company. And there was a gentleman here in the U.S. who arranged this whole operation to spirit him out of the country and back to Lebanon, which was his home country. That gentleman, I think, has been extradited from the U.S. to Japan, where he faces charges for organizing this. As I recall, the CEO was smuggled out in a large music case, which was then taken on board the aircraft. So it may well be the case that the pilots had no idea whatsoever that they were transporting anything other than a music case and some people associated with it. And one of the pilots said, "We were expected to be suspicious and were sentenced because we weren't suspicious." And I think that's just something that pilots should keep in mind, especially people who are doing charter work. Yeah, there are going to be times when your antenna ought to go up. You really ought to just check out and find out what is this cargo that we're carrying here, because there is a tiny percentage of the population which will try and misuse charter aircraft for illegal purposes.
Amen.
Well, let's get to some old-fashioned crime stories, the kind that are easy to understand, kind of the traditional ones.
I mean, the ones that don't use too many big words for people like us.
Ones that use four-letter words like drug. So both of these are recent stories. This comes out of the dailymail.co.uk. It says, Good Samaritan, Royal Australian Air Force pilot, 75 years old, and accountant who met as Freemasons are both jailed over a plot to ship 271 kilos of, I think it's meth, into Australia. The pilot was charged. Let's see, it said they mentioned some of the good things about the pilot. They say the former pilot who fostered a child and fundraised for hospitals is behind bars over his failed plan to fly 271 kilograms of ice to Australia. And they've also got his co-conspirator, a 61-year-old. They met as Freemasons more than a decade ago. Both had long marriages, children, solid and stable jobs. So I think what we're finding here is, yes, somebody could be an upstanding citizen all their life, but then motivated by financial gain, they somehow became tangled up in an intercontinental drug plot to traffic ice to Melbourne, with a street value, by the way, of $118 million. It says that after a decade with the Australian Air Force, he took on other flying jobs as well as truck driving. A serious crash in 2011 left him with lasting injuries and an inability to take care of his farm, and he was bankrupted. They basically say that they had plans to use a Cessna 210. It looks like a pressurized 210 in the photo here. And somehow they're going to fly it from the United States to Australia. And they had some phenomenal number of stops that they were going to make. It was like 13 stops to get across the way. Let's see, he claimed he was only expected to receive $14,000 for his part in the deal. But that payment was also going to come in the form of the $1 million sale of the airplane, which I got to tell you, pressurized 210s go for a lot less than $1 million. That to me looks like at most a $200,000 airplane in the photo here. Anyway, this gentleman was jailed for 14 years. He's going to have to serve at least 8 years and 6 months before he's eligible for parole. And the other gentleman was sentenced to 17 years, won't be eligible parole for 11 years. And all I can say is just very refreshing to have a nice, simple, old-fashioned story. I'm stunned that this stuff still goes on. I thought that most of these kinds of things happened decades ago, but it just shows that there are still a few people who are trying to do some very illegal things with airplanes.
But you know what it also shows in all of these, in fact, the one we're going to see in a minute too, these people are not the brightest bulbs on the block. I'm just making a comment.
Well, I can't disagree.
Oh, next one's mine. I'm sorry. A man accused of fleeing a drug conspiracy charge in Nebraska for more than 3 decades and living under a false identity has pleaded guilty to federal charges in Florida. This man is 72. A couple of Tuesdays ago in federal court, he pleaded guilty to passport fraud, aggravated identity theft, and operating as a pilot without a license, according to the court records at least. He faces up to 15 years in prison. He was arrested in his home about 50 miles northwest of Orlando. And according to the criminal complaint, this pilot applied for a passport last Friday using the name, birth date, and social security number of a baby who had died as an infant in 1955. I mean, who knew anybody'd catch him, huh? He had previously used that identity in 2016 to obtain a pilot's license. In 1985, this person and 73 others were indicted by a federal grand jury in Nebraska, and the prosecutors alleged that he was the drug kingpin on a railroad line used to move narcotics throughout the U.S. Records show that this man was the only defendant not apprehended in the case, and those charges were dismissed in 2014. But fingerprints confirmed this man's identity after his arrest because he was not smart enough to have his fingerprints changed, which I think you can do. The federal prosecutors said that for the drug case, now retired, they had continued searching for this man even after he didn't show up in court in the mid-1980s. Okay, even 10 years ago, when this person's younger brother died, law enforcement went to the funeral home hoping to catch the bad guy, but they were unsuccessful. So the drug case is now dismissed. The government officials have charged this person with making false statements in his application for a passport.
Yeah, so it's really fascinating that the drug charges got dropped after more than 3 decades. However, it's the false identity charge that they finally got him on. It's kind of like the old Al Capone. We're not going to get you on all the many crimes, but we'll get you on tax evasion. So in this particular case, he used his false identity to not only get a passport, but to also apply for a pilot's license. So they got him on both those charges.
Well,
So once again, crime doesn't pay, right?
no, it doesn't. And boy, this is the weirdest bunch. Again, I can say the weirdest bunch of stories we've ever discussed, Max. And where do you find this stuff? Do you Google strange pilot stories to find this stuff?
What I do is anytime I hear this,
stories of the
I know it's going to be time to invite you back on the show and to talk about it. These come in waves. I don't know what it is, but there just seems to be certain times a year where, suddenly spring is out and the sap is running, and some of those saps run into legal problems.
Yeah, boy, that's no kidding, is it? I don't understand any of this stuff, actually. So, and all I've got to say is that, guys, if you get a pilot's license, please respect the fact that it's a privilege, and realize that if you get caught, it's probably going to be easier on you in the long run to just say, I did it, and take your hits. You might, if you learned a lesson, you might only get your license suspended for a while.
Indeed. Hey, I left out, and I forgot to mention earlier, probably the most ironic thing of all the things we've mentioned here. Remember the Southwest pilot who was up in the cockpit with his pants unzipped?
I wasn't there, but I heard about it.
Yep. I looked up his pilot certificate. This is the absolute truth. The town he lives in, the name of the town is Longwood. On that note, Rob, all I can say is thank you so very much for joining us for Stories of the Weird.
And you hire me for this stuff. This is incredible. I just don't think anybody in the aviation media world would ever, actually, most of us would never even claim to be the ones helping with this kind of thing, because these stories are so strange. But for you, buddy, I'm glad to help anytime.
Well, and I think that there are so many stories that are sad, in the field of aviation. It's kind of fun sometimes to just look at some of the ones that make you laugh or make you think or make you realize, something that I thought was kind of innocuous could get me into serious trouble.
Well, and one last thing too is that we're kind of making light of some of these because they seem rather silly and stupid to us, but there are incidents like some of these that turn into accidents that cost people their lives and the lives of passengers, and that's what's just really, really awful. But again, as I can't remember who that comic was that always said you can't fix stupid. And some of these people, we can't really label them as much more than that.
Yeah,
we just can't.
Well, aviation is a very, very serious business, which is why all of us need to, act professionally. And we've got great examples here of people who acted unprofessionally. So everyone should be on notice now.
Absolutely, and we hope we never read a story like this about somebody that was a Jet One reader or an Aviation Talk listener.
Yep, hopefully not. Hopefully we're all smarter and wiser. Well, Rob, thanks again. We'll see you soon.
Hey, we'll see you, man. Be good.
And my thanks to our good friend Rob Mark. I've included links in the show notes to his jetwine.com blog and to Flying Magazine where he works. And I hope you enjoyed the stories we shared today. You just can't beat the stories. And if you did enjoy the show, please take a moment right now to stop exercising, stop mowing the grass, or pull over if you're driving, and find the share button in whatever app you're listening to us right now, and share this episode with several friends who you think should also be listening to Aviation News Talk every week. Because if you're learning things from this show every week and becoming a safer pilot, and sometimes getting entertained by the stories, why shouldn't your friends be listening too? And how else are they going to find out about the show unless you tell them about it? So stop what you're doing right now, take the 1 or 2 minutes it takes you to find the share button, and send this episode to a friend right now. Then, later, follow up with your friend to see if they have figured out how to listen to the show. And if they haven't, tell them about the free dedicated Aviation News Talk app that they can download onto their iPhone or Android phone or tablet, and then just have him or her go out to the Apple App Store or the Google Play Store, search for Aviation News Talk, and download our free app just like they would download any other app. It's an easy way to get the show for free each week. And in the time we just talked about it, you could have already shared the show with a friend, so pull over now and do it. Thank you so much for taking the time to do this one little thing which will help us grow the show and help you help your friends. So until next time, fly safely, have fun, and keep the blue side up.